The sixth, and perhaps most important thing that I say on this issue of the Old Testament violence is that a robust theory may still hold together despite inconsistencies. We need to acknowledge that there are some Old Testament ethics and actions that look inconsistent with the one revealed to us in Jesus. I don't for a second think I've resolved many of the issues. But here's the thing. When you come across a discrepancy, an inconsistency in a robust theory, whether historical or scientific, it doesn't bring the whole thing down. You can live in the tension. I'll give you just some examples. Here's a historical example. The great majority of experts on Roman Palestine believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by a group of Jews known as the Essenes. Okay? That is the dominant view of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there are some facts that are inconsistent with that. Some of the things that Josephus says that Essenes believed are actually contradicted in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So a few scholars, and they're a tiny minority actually, have proposed that we give up the theory that the Essenes produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. But most scholars aren't budging because too many other lines of evidence point in the direction that the Essenes produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. What they do is they try and imagine ways in which the inconsistencies might fit into the larger theory. The larger theory holds together. It doesn't collapse, even though there are still to this day some inconsistencies in the evidence. What about a scientific example? Our atheist friends regularly like to tell us that the theory of evolution is established fact. But they also know full well that there are some inconsistencies in the theory of evolution as it now stands. The fossil record doesn't suggest the small incremental changes we expect. And the Cambrian explosion offers a special problem. Now, I know that there are scientists working on ways of resolving these inconsistencies, but as yet there isn't agreement on what explains this data. Okay? Nevertheless, committed evolutionists still ask us to accept the theory, despite the inconsistencies, because, they tell us, other multiple lines of evidence point in the direction of the theory. And I think this is an important one to raise with your atheist friends because they so firmly accept evolution with inconsistencies that aren't resolved. And what I'm saying is that we can admit that parts of the Old Testament really do trouble us deeply and that we can't see how they fit into the wider theory. Not that Jesus is a theory. We can also try and imagine ways in which the data might fit, actually. I've got some wild speculations that I'm not willing to say in public. But there are enough indications on other grounds, philosophical, historical, personal, that the God of the Old Testament is the God of love revealed in Jesus. We can cling to that as a robust paradigm, despite the fact that I'm still troubled by things I read in the Old Testament. Well, let me conclude part A. At CPX, we recently had the privilege of interviewing Professor Michael Ruse from Florida University. And he's a well-known atheist, and yet he's a well-known critic of the new atheists. And one of the delightful things he said in the interview, and you can see the footage at publicchristianity.org, is that he hates the way Dawkins thinks he has found questions Christians haven't thought about. And he actually says at one point, quote, "Christians have some very grown-up answers to this stuff, but Dawkins and co. don't bother to read them." Let me move on to point B. Violence of the church through history. How is it that the followers of Jesus ever came to be associated with violence power and imperialism. The slogan, "Religion leads to violence," finds plausibility today, in my view, not through facts and logic, but through simple repetition. And I am amazed at how often the criticism comes up. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm at lunch with a whole bunch of sceptical people, and one of them pipes up and says, religion, particularly Christianity, started all the wars. And I said, which ones? He thought a moment and he said, the Crusades, Northern Ireland, hardly all the wars. Perhaps he'd been reading Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, who says, we believe with certainty that an ethical life can be lived without religion, and we know for a fact that the corollary holds true, that religion has caused innumerable people not just to conduct themselves no better than others, but to award themselves permission to behave in ways that would make a brothel keeper or an ethnic cleanser to raise an eyebrow. In Belfast, I have seen whole streets burned out by sectarian warfare between different sects of Christianity, and interviewed people whose relatives and friends have been kidnapped and killed or tortured by rival religious death squads, often for no other reason than membership of another confession. And my lunchtime friend would have found great comfort in a 3-part series that showed on Australian television recently. Have you seen this one? The Secrets of the Inquisition? Beautifully shot. Terrible. Here the church is presented as doing nothing but torturing, raping, pillaging, mass murdering through the 350-year Spanish Inquisition. And as I was preparing this material, the major Australian newspaper, the Sunday Age, offered this stunning piece of secularist apologetics. The question I can't escape, says Michael Coulter, who's one of the editors of the newspaper, is why so many people clearly prefer the realm of faith, the realm of inquisition and violent jihad, to the realm of thought. In my view, thought actually isn't the secularist's best friend on this particular issue. The religion leads to violence mantra has become a truism in our culture, mainly because fascinating people, popular books and high-production documentaries have said it so often, it's true now. But it isn't true. And my lunchtime friend would have found great comfort in a 3-part series that showed on Australian television recently. Have you seen this one? The Secrets of the Inquisition? Beautifully shot. Terrible. Here the church is presented as doing nothing but torturing, raping, pillaging, mass murdering through the 350-year Spanish Inquisition. And as I was preparing this material, the major Australian newspaper, the Sunday Age, offered this stunning piece of secularist apologetics. The question I can't escape, says Michael Coulter, who's one of the editors of the newspaper, is why so many people clearly prefer the realm of faith, the realm of inquisition and violent jihad, to the realm of thought. In my view, thought actually isn't the secularist's best friend on this particular issue. The religion leads to violence mantra has become a truism in our culture, mainly because fascinating people, popular books and high-production documentaries have said it so often, it's true now. But it isn't true. Not in the blanket sense that's often intended. What can we say? I think there are a few things we can go on the front foot with. But first, we need to go on the back foot and concede a partial truth. I doubt you will find any Christian today who is not rightly and deeply ashamed of the Inquisition, the Crusades and so on. We concede that these are terrible departures from the faith. We confess it. Secondly, That said, retellings of these stories of violence frequently involve gross exaggerations. Can I introduce you to a stunning new book by David Bentley Hart, a patristics scholar, Greek Orthodox believer and philosopher. It is a most powerful answer to the claim that Christianity has just raped and pillaged through history. And one very persuasive argument he makes in the book is that every new era tends to retell stories about the era it replaces by exaggerating the evils of that era, so as to present itself as the great deliverer, as the bringer of special freedoms. This requires exaggerations. We do this about the 1950s in a small way. We do it about the Puritans or Victorian England. The Enlightenment figures, the famous Enlightenment figures, did it about the so-called Dark Ages. In fact, they coined a phrase that scholars no longer use: Dark Ages. Historians don't use that. Here's Bentley Hart in full flight. Hence modernity's first great attempt to define itself: an age of reason, emerging from and overthrowing an age of faith. Behind this definition lay a simple but thoroughly enchanting tale. Once upon a time, it went, Western humanity was the cosseted and incurious ward of Mother Church. During this age of faith, culture stagnated, science languished, wars of religion were routinely waged, witches were burned by inquisitors, and Western humanity laboured in brutish subjugation to dogma, superstition, and the unholy alliance of church and state. All was darkness. Then in the wake of the wars of religion that had torn Christendom apart came the full flowering of the Enlightenment, and with it the reign of reason and progress, the riches of scientific achievement and political liberty, and a new and revolutionary sense of human dignity. The secular nation-state arose, reduced religion to an establishment of the state, or in the course of time to something altogether separate from the state, and thereby rescued Western humanity from the blood-steeped intolerance of religion. Now at last Western humanity has left its non-age and attained to its majority in science, politics and ethics. The story of the travails of Galileo almost invariably occupies an honoured place in this narrative, as exemplary of the natural relation between faith and reason, and as an exquisite epitome of scientific reason's mighty struggle during the early modern period to free itself from the tyranny of religion. This is, as I say, a simple and enchanting tale, easily followed and utterly captivating in its explanatory tidiness. Its sole defect is that it happens to be false in every identifiable detail. This tale of the birth of the modern world has largely disappeared from respectable academic literature and survives now principally at the level of folklore, intellectual journalism and vulgar legend. Lies and exaggerations about the past shore up a new paradigm sense of self. If I had time, I'll give you a lovely quote from G.K. Chesterton from the book Orthodoxy. I just turned you to page 106, 107, basically saying the same thing. But let me give you some examples of the exaggerations of this story. If you want great detail, go to Bentley Hart. It is truly a stunning book. It is estimated by historians that the Spanish Inquisition killed approximately 5,000 to 6,000 people over its 350-year period. 5,000 to 6,000 over 350 years. I have this on the authority of Edward Peters, professor at Pennsylvania University, one of the leading scholars of the Crusades and the Inquisition and so on, and I believe not a believer. The point is, that's fewer than 18 people a year killed in the Inquisition. Now, one a year is too many, right? But it hardly sustains the monstrous narratives you often hear.